Dzień dobry. This week we'll be exploring Poland. We'll be spending most of our time in the old capital of Krakow and one night in the modern capital of Warsaw. Along the way, we'll be drinking cherry vodka, eating pierogies, and appreciating the history of a country that spent the better part of the 20th century as a punching bag for both the Soviets and the Nazis.
Poland is not on the top of many travel itineraries, and if you haven't explored the major sites of Europe, it probably shouldn't be. But if you're looking for a slice of old-world Europe with all of the atmosphere and none of the crowds, then Poland is a great option. Its history is long and tragic, but today the country feels youthful and energetic, helped in part by its membership in the European Union. Poland is in the middle of Europe. It's a mostly flat country whose location between Russia and Germany has caused much of its pain over the past couple hundred years. We came over from New York for 4 nights, 3 in Krakow, including a day trip to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and 1 final night in the new capital of Warsaw. The 2 best things about Poland are the old world atmosphere, which Krakow has lots of, and the low prices. Poland is in the European Union, but doesn't use the euro. Even in Krakow's touristy old town, a breakfast bagel costs no more than a nickel. And while hotel rooms are cheap, if you're staying for more than a couple days, there are a lot of great Airbnb apartments around the old town. We found one with a great view of the castle. Krakow is one of the oldest towns in Poland, dating back to the 7th century. For 500 years during the Middle Ages, it served as Poland's capital. After a series of invasions from the Tartars of Central Asia in the 13th century, Krakowians surrounded their city with nearly 2 miles of defensive fortifications. While much of that was dismantled in the 19th century and replaced with a park, the remaining walled-in Old Town is Krakow's #1 site. Just outside the walls, 19th century trams screech their way along the Old Town, but inside, you're more likely to see a horse-drawn carriage than a car. Each cobbled street oozes with atmosphere, and all of them seem to converge on Krakow's gigantic medieval square, the biggest in Europe. Back then, if you wanted to sell something, you had to sell it in this square. It's hard to believe, but 30 years ago, when Poland was occupied by the Soviet Union, this was a desolate, empty space. Today, it's full of wandering tourists, strolling Poles, and the occasional street performer. For the best view of the Old Town, head to the top of St. Mary's. A church has stood in this spot for 800 years. Take a quick peek inside to see the elaborate wood-carved altarpiece. Back in the center of the square, you'll find a big building known as the Cloth Hall, because that's where cloth sellers once sold their goods.
Today's cloth hall is great for souvenirs, like amber jewelry or Christmas ornaments.
The market square is at the northern end of the old town's main road, called the Royal Way. When the king returned to the city, he would follow this route between the main gates and the castle. Strolling between Market Square and the castle, you'll pass by old churches and the city's original main square. At the end of the Royal Mile, on what seems to be the only hill in Krakow, you'll come face to face with the imposing Wawel Castle. Wawel Hill is one of Poland's most historic sites. A castle has stood here since the beginning of Polish history, and it's home to the country's national cathedral. Just a few minutes walk, tram, or horse ride from Wawel Castle is the Kazimierz neighborhood, which was once the old Jewish quarter. In the Middle Ages, when much of the world shunned the Jews, Poland's king Kazimierz the Great not only allowed them in, but granted them special trading privileges. That safe haven that Poland had provided for so long quickly turned into a nightmare when the Germans invaded in 1939. Poland had the largest Jewish population in Europe before World War II, once numbering about 3.5 million people. By the end of the war, there were just 300,000 left. To see firsthand the industrialized carnage inflicted on not just Poland, but Europe's entire Jewish population, you should visit the Auschwitz concentration camp about an hour-and-a-half drive west of Krakow. Auschwitz is one of many Nazi concentration camps around Europe that exterminated 6 million people during the Holocaust, most of them Jewish. While Auschwitz is better known, the much larger Birkenau concentration camp is just 2 miles away. The camp was built during the war to be a bigger, more efficient killing machine than Auschwitz. The Auschwitz camp was originally a military base. After invading Poland, the Nazis turned it into a prison camp. At first, Auschwitz was designated for enemies of the Third Reich. When the Germans began to carry out their final solution, Jews from around Europe were sent here to die. The former barracks contain exhibits highlighting both the experience of prisoners and the scale of carnage inflicted on them. The camp's lone crematorium is still intact. Auschwitz eventually proved to be too small and too inefficient for the Nazis, so they built the massive Birkenau camp in what was then unused farmland. It was through this guard tower that trains full of prisoners would pass. At the dividing platform, Nazi doctors evaluated every arriving prisoner. Those deemed fit to work were starved, beaten, and forced to work until they died. Most only survived a couple of months. If the doctor didn't think a prisoner was healthy enough to work, they were marched straight to the gas chamber. In 1945, when it became clear the Nazis' days were numbered and the Red Army was advancing through Poland, the crematoriums were blown up. The Nazis didn't want the world to know what they had done here. Krakow connects to Warsaw via a frequent high-speed train, which takes just over 2 hours. Standing in Warsaw's cute old town square, it's hard to believe that 85% of this city was destroyed at the end of World War II, retaliation by the Nazis for 2 uprisings in the city, the Jewish Ghetto Uprising in 1943 and the larger Warsaw Uprising in 1944. Both were ultimately unsuccessful, and hundreds of thousands died. The city was so badly damaged that town officials after the war questioned whether or not they should just start over somewhere else. Eventually, they decided to rebuild, and every aspect of every building was painstakingly restored.
On a quick trip to Warsaw, be sure to take a stroll down the Royal Way. It connects the modern new town in the center of Warsaw to the old town, which was painstakingly rebuilt after it was demolished in World War II.
Warsaw feels like a bustling big city compared to Krakow, but it's not without its charm. The Royal Way is lined with monuments, gardens, and statues, often in the shadow of the city's modern skyline. We also really enjoyed venturing into some of the gentrified residential districts for dinner. Parts of the city reminded us of Russia. While Poland was occupied by the Soviets, Stalin gave the Poles this building as a gift. Locals showed their gratitude by nicknaming it Stalin's Penis. We weren't sure what to expect in Poland, but what we found impressed us both. An energetic, modernizing country with a fascinating history that's easy on the budget. If you're considering a trip to Eastern Europe or looking for a good budget destination for a long weekend, then you should certainly consider Poland. It's from here, in the old town square, in the middle of Warsaw, that we say goodbye from Poland.